Hello, welcome to the latest pep talk. Today we have Alastair Somerville and his human-centered design. An interesting tidbit of information is Alistair did my meetup way back in, I think before lockdown, 2018. Me and my partner used to run a wee community called Undesign Redesign, and Alistair did the first ever meetup. It was brilliant. If I remember, I'll post a photograph or two from it back in the day. But anyway, I'm just going to pass over to Alistair and let him kick off.
Okay. Yes, thank you for the invite. And I'll do probably about 20 minutes of talking, and then we can just have time just to chat and relax. If you want to ask questions, that's fine. Or if you just want to speak from your own experiences, that's even better, actually. I'm going to try and transfer over to doing some slides. My trust in Google Meet is very low, so let me do that and see where we end up. I have to ask, what can you see now?
We can see the start of the slideshow.
And does it move?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, this is a slideshow then. Okay, this is humane-centered design. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes. I'm going to talk majority of it about accessibility and content design from my perspective. And I'm also going to throw in a bit of AI simply because, well, because it's annoying. Right, I'm Alastair Somerville. Alastair, get hold of me either on the web at acuity.design, or I do use social media, particularly Blue Sky, a lot. And I'm acuity.design there as well, if you need to find me. You will find probably majority of talks and majority I work on Blue Sky because I prototype in public. As I said, I come out of accessible design. Generally speaking, my work is in physical spaces, though I do digital as well, and I do cross-digital, sort of however one describes that nowadays. Majority of the work is in cognition and wayfinding, how people sense and perceive information and how people then use it to do what they want. I'm interested in perception. I'm interested in agency of human beings. I'm going to talk from one specific project in order to use that as an anchor to talk about why my approach changed to content design and the work, and how that affects my ideas about design in general. So the project we're going to talk about is the Imperial War Museum, and in particular the World War I gallery. So Imperial War Museum in London, they refitted very heavily. They completely excavated out building in about 6 years ago, probably longer now. And they built a completely new World War I gallery in the basement, right at the bottom of the building. This space was built for a new gallery, which would be explaining the whole of World War I, using artifacts, but also using audiovisual and other things. However, after spending several years building it, they finally approached me and wanted to talk about accessibility. And they want to talk about accessibility, but in talking about that, they then sent me the design files for exhibition. And it's really important to understand that a lot of the way in which museums think about exhibitions now changed. It changed in the 2010s, really, to the idea of narrative exhibition design. The idea that rather than just walking into a gallery and there's artifacts and they have little labels on them, that all the artifacts should be linked by a story, and you should follow the story through the museum, through the exhibit, in order to understand the relationship of the artifacts to history, to society, to wherever. And narrative exhibition design is how people think about the design of museum exhibits. So I was sent the whole of that file, and I was also sent a request. And the request was, and it was on the map, it was for a tactile object. What they meant was a tactile map of the exhibition space for blind and visually impaired users to be able to understand what they were about to go into. So it's at the beginning of the experience, a map of the space so that they can understand the journey they're about to make. What we ended up delivering was a tactile map of bounded narrative place and quiet spaces. And in some ways, this is humane-centered design. And it's easier to explain it by looking at it. So this is a photo of the map which is installed in the gallery. It's very close to the entrance of the gallery, and it's also in a very tight space. The whole gallery is very, very crammed, and therefore, and this is just purely a diversion from the main talk, the key there, the actual explanation, is on the right-hand side rather than the left-hand side of the map. Generally speaking, we would put it on left-hand side because that's where people view and interact with information, particularly in the West, is left to right. However, because of the tight space, we knew that people would actually encounter the map and encounter the edges of it physically, tactilely, from the right. So therefore we put, and the message at the bottom right-hand corner is actually a message saying this is a tactile map, so that people knew that they had come across the thing that they were looking for. The map is there. I'll just do a version which is, this is a purely graphic version which has got the Braille stripped out, since Braille doesn't work on screen. What you're looking at is the exhibition space, and what you're looking at is also a way of understanding how to move through it. The museum exhibitions is C-shaped. You start at the bottom, you go in, and then you follow the path all the way around and then up and then across and then out. One way in, one way out, no other exits or entrance, one path. That's the route. It's tricky. It's also, and I have to say, you only get this if you visit it, it's very concrete, it's very low ceiling, there is no natural light. So what did we do in content terms? What did we actually choose? First of all was create gaps in the narrative. So there is this very strong narrative through the whole thing of the war. But what we needed to do was actually impose some chapters, some gaps, some endings, so that people could actually cognitively and narratively understand their movement through space. If it's just one huge block of content, it would be too much. So there is a need to be able to divide it, as shown here, into 4 main blocks, into sort of things that allow a person to be able to perceive and then understand information in a way which is coherent to them. If you just present big blocks, people can't understand. This is the reason you need boundaries. Boundaries matter to people because it allows them to be able to understand stuff. So that's the first part. The second part is a map of sensory gaps. And this is the seating areas. Now, seating areas are, in museum terms, very important. I have, in fact, campaigned on the basis of sofas matter, and in many museums, I have ended up getting them get sofas and put them into places. However, this place is slightly different. The seating areas which are shown on the map are not all the seating areas. The seating areas shown on the map are, in fact, the seating areas which are in quiet spaces. The seating areas shown are the ones which are away from content, away from the audio visuals, away from the crowds. Because, and this, as I say, came out of having visited the place when it was a building site, and actually before visitors were even there, that it was going to be an incredibly intense and overwhelming experience. And given the lack of exits, once you're in, you're in. And therefore, what we need to do in humane terms was find some way of allowing people to escape content. And allowing people to escape content is one of the parts of humane content design. How do people avoid and recover their sense of self, recover their sense of connection with each other? And the seating areas, as shown here, are the ones which are allowing people to get some sense of their self back. Agency, autonomy, comfort, all of these things. Creating content in spaces that allows people to be able to do that. So, I mean, we've never actually told the museum this. It probably wasn't going to be a worthwhile conversation. It was too late to be able to do anything about the design. So therefore, all we could do was mitigate, which I have to say is quite a lot of accessible design. But this is the thing. These are the ways in which you try and use content to guide people to places which allow them to be themselves. By using kindness, we actually enable people to live better lives. So it's a map of gaps. And the map of gaps is the basis of what I would like to talk about. Because gaps are humane design. Gaps are kindness. It allows people to be themselves. It allows people time to recover. And this is against the fact that there's a systemic bias to blocks, big, huge blocks of content, which are held together by standards about presentation, etc. But fundamentally, it's big blocks is what systems like. And therefore, what we need to do is create cracks and create gaps, break things apart. I have an awful habit when I go into service design projects of just asking them to break the thing apart. They create beautiful journeys, and then I want to break them into pieces in order to make them humane, in order to make them usable. And therefore, in most talks I give to accessibility people, I will generally talk about chunking as being a fundamental piece of content design which helps in accessibility. The idea of being able to break things into chunks of text, chunks of narrative, such that they can be used and reused and remixed is really important. I must also say that I really, really loathe the word chunking. It's an ugly word to say, and it's an ugly word to look at, but the concept's good, so I will use it. But just know that I have issues with the word. So the process of chunking, the content design process of chunking enables the gaps. The gaps enable humane design. This is the process. And what are the gaps for? The gaps, I think there's, just for examples, 3 examples I'll talk about. First of all, cognition and storytelling. The gaps help people think about the content and think about the stories. And what this comes to, and this is one side of a card. During the COVID period, I did online workshops where the content was delivered on greetings cards. So the flip side of this card would have the actual professional content, but the inside of the card contained this process. And it's a cognitive map, and it's based upon Professor Lisa Feldman Barrett's neuroscience book, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. And what this was creating a note space about how do you take the vast mass of information and content, the loose and diverse, that we encounter and sort it. And the way the brain sorts stuff is by telling stories. It summarizes through stories. We tell stories to ourselves, and those create the material for our cognition. the dense and divergent. So we tell stories to ourselves, and therefore in designing material, designing for this process of taking information and breaking it into stories is the way that you actually create chunks. The chunks allows people to be able to mix the material more easily, such that they can think better. Second reason for using chunking: alternative formats and new voices. This is a slide from a project presentation for German museums, accessibility project. What this is trying to talk about is the fact that accessibility is, in the bottom left-hand corner, the entrance. It allows people to come into a space to be able to actually perceive the artifacts, perceive the art or the history, or the information. And as you create more metaphors, more content, more ways of explaining what you're doing, and as you use more formats, more mediums, more technologies, the other axis, you create more accessibility, more of that grey space. And yet one of the issues with a lot of museums is they hit the red line. And the red line is the limit of the ability of the people within the organization to create metaphors and use technologies. There is a limit to what people know themselves. And one of the reasons for breaking things is to break through that red line, to allow other people, visitors, other artists, other specialists, other people from different countries, different cultures, to actually use the material, use the artifacts, to be able to create their own metaphors and use their own formats, to be able to re-explain and remix the content so it's more understandable by more people. One of the key things here is that accessibility and diversity are the way in which you create more content for more people, rather than trying to fix it yourself, which you can't because you only have the perspectives from your own viewpoint. You let go. Letting go of content, letting go of control in order to enable other people to be able to represent it back to you is the solution. A lot of the time, people try to maintain control. They maintain within the red line, and they really shouldn't. And finally, third example, humane information spaces. Thinking about things from a human-centered, person-centered sense of content design. How do you actually offer that? This is just some tactile leaflets from an English heritage project for a Roman fort at Housesteads. It was a mini project. We had about 3 weeks to put it together. What they were trying to do was they had created this new representation of one of the forts using modern scaffolding and also art and words from the local community. They wanted a guidebook, but rather than presenting them with one guidebook, what we wanted to do was present them with several guidebooks. There's a general problem in wayfinding that people have a habit of thinking that they should only create one map, the iconic map, the one map to rule them all kind of problem. And what you actually should do is create different maps for different intentions. And this is what those are. These are maps for different intentions. So there's the single page, simple description, which is just the facts. That's one which is for people who arrive, want to orientate and align themselves, but actually get out there and experience the thing themselves. There's the more facts, please, which is the very, very deeper historical context and explanation by the artists, which is for people who like to have that kind of depth of information, because then they feel they can appreciate a thing better. And finally, there's just the tactile diagram of all the panel positioning, which again exists for people who want something alternative to what they can experience themselves. Why keep telling people badly what a thing is if you can just give them another way of explaining it or another way of experiencing it. So this is humane in a sense of you're supporting intent and agency. And the final example I'm just going to talk through is, and though it may not look like it, this is Belsay Hall, which is in the northeast of England, a English heritage project. And again, there's the large house with columns at the front, and in the background there's a ruined castle. All of this map shows is the interpretation panel and the forms of interpretation panel across the external spaces, across the gardens. And what this was a discussion for, and what this thing was made for, was a workshop where we were talking about how many panels, how much content should we actually put into external space? Because there's always that thing of thinking that the more explanations are better. But that's very much biased towards specialists. And what I was trying to explain to people is, for quite a lot of design purposes, you need to understand that the importance of the panel is not the information on the panel, but the stories and the ideas that people talk about after they've experienced the panel. As people walk away, people think the interaction with the content is the important data point. I would say the important point is what they do afterwards, what they say, what they do, where they go, and the stories they tell each other then. That's what matters. So if you have too much content, there's not enough gaps for people to be able to actually talk to each other, to create the new stories, to be able to have relationships between generations, between different people. And so therefore the gaps are actually gaps for people. You're creating those deliberately. So humane-centered content design is holding space for people. It's holding space which is kind in a sense that it allows them to do the thing they want to do without feeling discomfort. But it also holds space for them to actually create their own content, share their own ideas with each other and with people around them. And yet, artificial intelligence, I just want to just have a quick chat about this because it matters. Artificial intelligence is turning up quite a lot, and it's turning up in ways which are unhelpful. Because AI summaries are showing again the idea that the system is biased to creating blocks. It likes creating blocks. Google summaries, more blocks of more text. And so in general, there's a system bias to blocks held by standards, and that's always existed. And yet now we have the systemic bias to data sets held by algorithms. It's the same thing, it's just slightly different. And so blocks, this systemic idea of large content blocks, inaccessible, unusable, is. And yet even that's not necessarily the problem we think. There are spaces here, and I think it's worth talking about them. Because the weakness of AI, of the LLMs that we're seeing currently, is made explicit in the prompts that we create to use them. And this came up in a Wired article just a few weeks ago called "The Real Demon Inside ChatGPT." And it's an interesting article, but what came away from me is something which is true of a lot of technologies. A lot of technologies depend upon borrowing from humans. And what they need to borrow is anchors. They need human perspectives, human embodiment, to be able to tether themselves to utility, to usability. The problem with the ChatGPT systems, the Gen AI stuff is that they are untethered systems which need human beings to anchor them to some form of meaning. And the prompt, what you put in the prompt, if you look at the content of the prompt, the way in which prompts are created, the way in which characters and purposes are put into prompts, that shows the reason what is missing from the AI. What we say to the AI is what the AI needs because it does not have it. So what we lend to AI are these three things. We lend them context. The systems have no bodies. They have no perspective upon what they're talking or doing. And therefore they need something to be a persona, a place, a body, to be able to understand what the hell they're trying to say. So we provide context. The systems have no sense of right or wrong, and therefore we provide ethics. We provide a sense of good and bad. And finally, they have no sense of human emotion, and emotion is one of the critical things about humans in terms of it's a way in which we actually understand information, understand places, understand each other. And the systems use emotion and need emotion because it's part of our meaning-making system. And so these are things which we lend that the AI borrows from us. And so the gap here, the gap in the AI systems is between the data sets and the algorithms. The gap is being human. The gaps are human design, because these are the things which the systems do not have. These are the things the systems have no awareness of. They depend upon our ability, our capacity as humans to work. So human-centered content design is holding a space for humanity. When we have all of these automated AI, Gen AI systems around us, the content design is holding a space for the context, for the ethics, for the emotion. And so what we need to do in all of this is continue to make cracks in big blocks. When people present large blocks of content, when people present huge piles of information, how do we chunk it? How do we create cracks and break it down? How do we actually keep pushing meaning into the gaps, pushing humanity, our sense of humanity and our sense of kindness into the gaps of the contents system? And finally, what that means is deep down and in human-centered terms, in terms of yourself, myself, ourselves, is value being human and value being kind. This is the anchor. This is what the AI doesn't have. This is what the systems don't have. So value yourself. It's the most valuable thing. It's the most valuable thing about all of this, is being human and valuing yourself as a human. And that's it. Thank you.
That was great, Alistair.
Okay.
It was great. Just I think it's worth hanging on that last point, because we do need to value ourselves. It gets quite we can get quite beaten down by the AI argument all the time. Yeah, but that was really good.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to say? And I realise I've just talked across to you, Alistair, so come back in.
No worries.
Joe.
Thank you so much. This is just really good, and it's like got my brain kind of buzzing, as it does when I hear things that, you know, I really enjoy it and enthusiastic about. It's vibing quite a lot with me right now. I'm working for a charity called Chen, and we support survivors of gender-based violence. And actually, I'm on a contract now, but I went to them as a content designer, and it was one of the sort of the main things was to try and allow for different types of survivors coming at different stages of their journey, needing different things from the information that we provide. So it's I don't know, you've just kind of like put into words a whole part of this creating gaps is just such a lovely way to frame that, creating gaps for people to be themselves, to find what they need to approach the journey in the way they want to approach it, you know, to get information in the way that they need to get it, because it's trauma-informed design. We have to be so aware of the potential for triggering somebody or for the emotional state that they might be in. So yes, I'll be taking this back to talk about it in this way, you know, because I think it's really helpful. And I absolutely do wholeheartedly agree with that sort of that human element. Is what I keep coming back to. We're actually, our sort of one-line positioning is tech that heals, not harms. But it is about creating the space for the human in the tech in order to protect people and create that context. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that reminds me, there's a load of work I did on emotional design, and a lot of that came to how do you actually provide a space for people to actually come to you who are in emotional distress. And a lot of that came down to not trying to explain things from your own perspective, but actually provide the experiences and the stories of people who've been in similar experiences. Because it's not about telling people what they should feel. It's telling people that other people felt it like them. Yeah.
Or if they didn't, that's still okay. I mean, yeah, we do. Yeah. We're open source and like have a sort of co-creation policy. So we work with teams of volunteers, and all the kind of content, the media content that we put together, it's all like come from volunteers, co-created with them. So it's always about kind of getting their voices in there, and just really understanding that any one person's perspective is not necessarily going to be the same as anybody else's. So you can't flatten that experience. It's very nuanced. Yeah, it's really interesting work.
Anybody else with anything? A question? Or Sarah? I think you're on mute.
Right, I just tried to unmute myself. Yeah, that's worked, hasn't it? So I should get rid of the logo person avatar also. There we go. You mentioned while you were talking about allowing people to create their own metaphors. I wondered if you could say a bit more about that. I was curious. I think you were talking about
it's merely the fact that the way in which we have, I mean, it was the ways in which we think about, you know, the cognitive models that we have. I mean, as such, metaphors come out of cognitive models in a sense that the way in which you feel comfortable explaining a thing. So when you're holding on to, you know, I mean, this goes to the linguistics of stuff like, you know, talking about food or talking about drinks, etc. If from a British sense of the word, you would be talking about tea and coffee and all these other sort of metaphors of comfort or kindness or whatever. And yet those mean nothing in certain cultures, because why would tea or coffee or whatever mean anything within certain cultures? And therefore looking for other people's metaphors, other cultures, what they view as a way of explaining things. matters, rather than just holding, as I say, it's trying to create spaces for other people to create their explanations of how they think about the art, the artifacts, the history. It's a metaphor in that sense is just trying to say it's going to be a mixture of emotion, words, history, culture, whatever. A sort of broad mix of those things is what metaphor was being covered by there. I also have to say it's because I have a habit of rhyming my content, so it was metaphor and medium, so it was all the M's. But it's that trying to understand the sort of the cognitive model stuff of how people explain things.
That makes sense. You're not just imposing your own models on the entire audience.
Yeah. Well, no, and also you being aware that your cognitive models and your perspective will be utterly incomprehensible to other people, which particularly working in museums is something they need to understand. The professional language, professional history, the jargon, the way in which they think is a way of thinking, but it may not necessarily be a way which helps other people from other places, other cultures, other educational levels. And leaving the gap so people can remix it.
You've got my head buzzing, Alistair. It's great. I'm speaking to a stakeholder tomorrow, and I'm going to use some of the words you've used here. Probably going to bastardize them from your original meaning, but it's going to be really helpful with regards to redrafting, repurposing some funded information. And the overwhelming and the confusing stuff, basing with the chunking and creating space for them to create their own metaphors, is making me think I've got a new lexicon to challenge this stakeholder with the nonsense they're trying to push in my direction.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, I mean, as with co-design, there is a point where I do this because I'm very lazy, in the fact that letting go of control, other people create the content, other people create the meaning. There is a point where by being professional, by being really controlling, you create all the stress and hold the stress to yourself.
Yeah.
And if you just let go, then it becomes somebody else's work. I mean, that may sound like a bad thing, but it's just, if you hold things completely yourself, it will break you. But if you create gaps, you get people to support you.
I'm going to do one last shout out. Anybody got any comments, any questions? Nia.
I'll jump in with something quickly. Alistair, you mentioned the bias towards blocks, and it made me think about, I think in the industry that there's kind of a bias towards content being a solution, when actually, you've got a broken service or a broken product and no amount of content can really fix it. It's more of a systemic issue. So you were just making me think of that. And I think sometimes, there is this bias towards, we'll just try and explain it better, or we'll try and, sort of plaster over and just provide more content to try and patch the thing that's actually broken underneath. I guess I just wondered if you had any advice for content designers when, you can very clearly see that the sort of maybe the service is actually broken, but you're being asked to produce more and more content to try and explain things. I don't know.
I mean, the way in which, projects I've done, cultural projects I've done before now, particularly, there's a few projects in Europe where there was a lot of small teams. And as I say, I have an awful habit of coming across people who have created these beautiful service design journeys and these very, very complete and total stories. And rather like the Imperial War Museum thing, I distrust the completeness of them. the beautifulness of the things created from these blocks, these bricks, creating this sort of solid wall of content worries me. And in some projects, I have deliberately asked people to break their service design journeys apart, because what I want them to do, and it's a workshop exercise I sometimes do, is seeking out the smallest story they can create from the content they're trying to do, because this is how people communicate. I remember coming across somebody talking about a project in the northeast of England where they were seeking out information which was left over from the very early universal benefit projects, where there was material, there were brochures and websites and telephone helplines created in order to help the people in the prototype stage. And what they found, and this was almost an anthropological exercise, what they found was there were fragments left over in the community of specific phrases and specific telephone numbers, which were recognized as having power. If you use this phrase, the person on the other end would actually react to you. And therefore, what they realized that was there were these fragments of stories, these minimum viable narratives of things that get people the thing they want without having to do all the thing. And so the idea of this sort of minimal viable narrative or story is really interesting. How do you actually break the big content down into the story which people have to use to be able to use the system? And can you explain the thing you're doing in ways? And this goes to this idea of the cognitive way in which, you know, the sort of Lisa Barrett-Feltman stuff of humans understand stuff by telling stories to themselves. So if you go through the storytelling process repeatedly, you are going to go through how people think. And therefore, if you ask people to repeatedly tell the story to each other, to new people, you actually create the ability to find how to break the blocks apart. You actually create the way in which you can map the service design in a narrative sense, which is a human sense, rather than sort of the God view mapping way of doing it.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that idea. Minimal viable narrative. Thank you.
Does anybody have anything else, or will we bring it to a close? I don't know why I'm moving into the camera. That's great, Alistair. Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording.